Over the course of the weekend, President Donald Trump sat down for an interview with Lesley Stahl of 60 Minutes, and this was by far one of the most bizarre, unhinged interviews I think he's given yet. And to me, he really came off as a prepubescent child during this interview, and it's not like that's some new phenomenon because I think he always tends to act pretty bratty and childish, but I feel as though he's deteriorating throughout the course of his presidency. He's becoming more childlike as he gets older. And I say this because when you think of the characteristics associated with a bratty child, I think that they were similar to Donald Trump's behavior here. I mean, he was confrontational. He was overly defensive, evasive. His statements were often contradictory. He gave irrational justifications for his bad behavior. And some of the answers that he gave were just downright laughable. So I honestly don't know where to begin with this interview. It was relatively long, so we'll just start here with Trump's characterization of the world that we live in.
This is the most deceptive, vicious world. It is vicious, it's full of lies, deceit, and deception.
Now, that's not necessarily a disagreeable assertion per se, but coming from Donald Trump, I mean, that just strikes me as hypocritical, because he is one of the main individuals that is perpetuating the viciousness that we see today in American politics. So it's ironic to me that he has the audacity to talk about the viciousness of American politics as he is the one that is spreading all of the viciousness. Case in point, just a couple of weeks ago, he mocked Dr. Christine Blasey Ford. Now, he was actually asked about this during the interview, and his justification for this was downright unacceptable.
You mimicked her.
Had I not made that speech, we would not have won. I was just saying she didn't seem to know anything.
No,
and you're trying to destroy a life of a man who has been extraordinary.
Why did you have to make fun of her?
I didn't really make fun.
Well, they were
What I
laughing.
said is the person that we're talking about didn't know the year, the time, the place.
Professor Blasey Ford got before the Senate and was asked, what's the worst moment? And she said, when the two boys laughed at me, at my expense.
Okay.
And then I watched you mimic her, and thousands of people were laughing at her.
They can do what I will tell you this, the way now Justice Kavanaugh was treated has become a big factor in the midterms. Have you seen what's gone on with the polls?
But did you have to?
Well, I think she was treated with great respect. I'll
but,
be honest.
But do you think
there
you
are those that
treated
think
her
she
with-
shouldn't have been?
Do you think you treated her with great respect?
I think so, yeah, I did.
But you seem to be saying that she lied.
Well, you know what? I'm not going to get into it because we won. It doesn't matter.
Well-
we won.
It doesn't matter. Well, we won.
That was absolutely absurd. In response to Lesley Stahl asking him why he mimicked Dr. Christine Blasey Ford, he says, quote, "Had I not made that speech, he would have won, or he would not have won." What? If you didn't mock Dr. Christine Blasey Ford, then Kavanaugh would not have been confirmed to the Supreme Court? That's honestly what he's saying here. Okay, so let's parse this out a little bit. What does it take to get Kavanaugh confirmed? Or what was it that ultimately secured his confirmation? Well, by and large, it came down to 5 undecided senators. And of those 5, 3 ultimately ended up voting to confirm Brett Kavanaugh. That includes Joe Manchin, Jeff Flake, and Susan Collins. Now, for what he's saying to be true, it would have had to have been the case that those undecided senators, the thing that put them over the edge was seeing Donald Trump mock Dr. Ford. So they were undecided before, but when Susan Collins saw the way that President Trump mocked her like a buffoon, then she thought, oh, now it all makes sense to me. I have to vote for Brett Kavanaugh.
How'd you get there? I don't remember. Where is the place? I don't remember.
1 week later,
The allegations failed to meet the more likely than not standard.
24 hours later,
The nomination of Brett M. Kavanaugh
of Maryland to be an Associate Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States
is confirmed.
makes sense.
Now, we know why that's demonstrably false, because these senators, in fact, made public comments saying that they were against Donald Trump mocking Christine Blasey Ford. And according to Burgess Everett of Politico, Joe Manchin called Trump's mocking of Dr. Ford awful and very wrong. And additionally, Everett adds, Republican Senators Susan Collins of Maine, Jeff Flake of Arizona, and Lisa Murkowski of Alaska all criticized Trump sharply for his remarks, reactions taken as unhelpful by GOP leaders. So if anything, him mocking Christine Blasey Ford made it more difficult for these 5 undecided senators, particularly the 3 that voted to confirm Kavanaugh in the end, to justify this vote to their constituents. But Trump is saying, no, if I didn't mock her and be a dick, Kavanaugh would have been defeated. That makes no sense. It's such an idiotic thing to say, and I get it. It's coming from Donald Trump. He spews nonsense on a daily basis, but still, he's the president of the United States. What he says matters. Now, he also downplayed the extent of his mocking, and in true Trumpian fashion, he said the opposite of what was actually true in reality. He said that he actually felt as if he treated her with respect, and he ended by saying, look, I'm not going to get into it because we won. It doesn't matter. Unreal. I don't understand how any reasonable human being can look at this guy, look at his behavior, his overall demeanor, and think, I like that guy. I'm going to support him. I'm going to join the MAGA train. It just honestly doesn't make any sense to me. Now, Lesley Stahl, she did a fairly decent job, in my opinion, but she did throw a soft ball at Donald Trump, just right down the center at him, and she asked him, an easy question. What did you learn the most from being president? And on the easiest question possible, where he just could have espoused platitudes and been non-confrontational, well, he still took the time to make a fool of himself, and he critiqued media in a really ironic way.
I never knew how dishonest the media was. I really mean it. I'm not saying that as a soundbite. I never knew how dishonest.
I'm going to change the subject again.
Well, no, but even the way you asked me a question, like about separation.
Yeah.
When I say Obama did it, you don't want to talk about it.
No, I disagree, but I don't want to have that fight with you.
Hey,
All right,
it's
we're going to
okay.
have another fight with you.
Leslie, it's okay. In the meantime, I'm president and you're not.
I'm president and you're not.
I'm president and you're not. Who says things like this? You'd think that with Donald Trump being president now for nearly 2 years, we'd get used to his shenanigans, but the fact that a reality television star has been our president now for almost 2 years, it doesn't make it any less weird. It doesn't make it seem as if we are not living in the Twilight Zone. I haven't been desensitized to his demeanor, his tactics, and his overall behavior. It's still very weird to see a gigantic man-child in the White House say something that is so childish. Well, I'm president, you're not. I mean, I honestly don't even know what to say. Now, he addresses what he's learned by saying, I never knew how dishonest the media was. Now, there are problems with cable news. I am an individual who often criticizes them, and it's not necessarily because they're dishonest, even though that's part of the problem. It's because they're too corporatized. So corporate-owned media, they have specific agendas. They don't want to cover things that might get in the way of what their owners want. Net neutrality being an example. They don't want to talk about anything that might jeopardize the relationship that they have with advertisers, which is why they often stay away from war, since defense contractors do advertise on mainstream news networks. But think about Donald Trump and how odd it is for him to bemoan the media for being dishonest, while the #1 news network in the country does propaganda for him 24 hours a day and defends his actions even when what he does is indefensible. And not only does Fox News defend and downplay Trump's worst acts, but he can call in to any of their shows at any time of the day in order to disseminate a particular message. I mean, to lambast the dishonest media while simultaneously excluding Fox News from that debate is just absurd. It's a joke. Now, think about the reason he gave. The example he states is, well, look, just an example during this interview. You asked me about child separation, and I tried to tell you about Obama having the same policy, and you didn't want to talk about it. Well, the reason why she didn't want to talk about that, Donald Trump, is because you're factually incorrect. President Obama is not being criticized for having a family separation policy because he didn't have a family separation policy. Now, that's not to say that his immigration policies weren't morally reprehensible and indefensible, but to suggest that Obama had a family separation policy that's on par with Trump's is intellectually dishonest. Now, can you look to certain Obama-era policies like the alien transfer exit program and say that that resulted in separation of families in some instances, maybe? Of course you can say that. Can you say that Obama choosing to deport certain members of an undocumented family separated families? Yes, you can also say that as well. I think that that's fair. But can you say that Obama's immigration policies were akin to Donald Trump's family separation policies in any way? You cannot say that if you want to be honest. Trump was separating all families as they arrived at the border as a deterrent. It was specifically designed to be cruel in order to dissuade other immigrants from trying to cross the border, and they were treated as criminals. They were detained not for administrative purposes. They were criminally detained, which is a big difference. And furthermore, Trump's administration is forcing toddlers to defend themselves in court. He's literally diverting funds from cancer research and HIV and AIDS programs in order to fund new shelters for immigrant children who his administration is still detaining. So is it fair to criticize President Obama for his unnecessarily cruel immigration policies? 100%. I do too. If you want to say that Obama's immigration policies were xenophobic and cruel, I'm with you. But at the same time, you have to be nuanced and acknowledge that President Obama's immigration policies, no matter how cruel they were, never reached the level of Trump's immigration policies. His zero-tolerance immigration policy program was specifically designed to break apart families. So even if it's the case that Barack Obama's immigration policies indirectly resulted in some instances in families being separated, the goal of Trump's policy, at least the way it was designed, made it so that way all families that arrived at the border were separated. Those are two very different things. So this false equivalence is absolutely unacceptable. And that's why people are more harsh on Trump than they are on Obama. It's because even though each successive administration has gotten more and more cruel, the jump from Obama to Trump was exponentially more cruel. So that's why we have to be realistic and nuanced about just how cruel Donald Trump's immigration policies are. Now, I want to get on to the next portion. So Lesley Stahl asked him about Kim Jong-un and why he's going out of his way to be buddy-buddy and be an ass kisser to Kim Jong-un. And his response was, it was weird to me.
I get along with him really well. I have a good energy with him. I have a good chemistry with him. Look at the horrible threats that were made. No more threats. No more threats.
He presides over a cruel kingdom of repression, gulags, starvation, reports that he had his half-brother assassinated, slave labor, public executions. This is a guy you love.
I know all these things. I mean, I'm not a baby. I know all these
but
things.
why do you love that guy?
Look. I get along with him, okay?
I get along with him, okay?
That was so weird and just, frankly, it was pretty creepy. I get along with him, okay?
I get along with him, okay?
Why are you breathing so heavily to describe the situation? So here's how he justifies some of the things he's been saying about Kim Jong-un. Look at the horrible threats that were made. No more threats. No more threats. Now, obviously, that's great. I'm glad that they're no longer exchanging threats of nuclear annihilation on Twitter every other day. I think that we can all admit that that's preferable, that this is preferable to before. But here's the thing that's really odd to me about Donald Trump. I'm going to show you a video of him describing the love that him and Kim Jong-un suddenly have for each other.
And then we fell in love, okay? No, really. He wrote me beautiful letters, and they're great letters. We fell in love.
Now, that's just one of the many instances of him talking about Kim Jong-un in a really positive way. And to be fair to him, I think he was probably being half serious in that particular clip. But here's the thing that's really striking about Donald Trump is that there's this dichotomy with him for every single issue. He can't just be neutral on Kim Jong-un, right? He has to either threaten to bomb him every other day, or he has to literally profess his love for Kim Jong-un. A reasonable person would say, look, I think that the status quo where we attacked each other and exchanged threats every single day, that wasn't working, but let's agree that even if I disagree with your horrendous policies, with the humanitarian disaster that is North Korea, that we're just not going to attack each other. But instead, Trump takes it the extra mile and jumps to the opposite end of the spectrum, where he's praising Kim Jong-un and talks about the love letters that Kim Jong-un is writing to him. You don't have to do that. And look, I'm someone who has praised Donald Trump. I've tried to be fair in saying, look, I would prefer this. I don't care how much he kisses Kim Jong-un's ass if it means that we're not going to have a war, if it means we will avert nuclear annihilation, right? But at the same time, he's kind of inadvertently legitimizing Kim Jong-un, which, I mean, you don't want to do. This is an objectively horrible human being, and you don't have to normalize Kim Jong-un just to de-escalate tensions. You can still acknowledge that Kim Jong-un is a murderous dictator who keeps some of his citizens in literal concentration camps and also not want to bomb him. But instead, what does Donald Trump do? He praises him and just goes out of his way to do it, which is weird. And I think that the criticism of Donald Trump for praising Kim Jong-un and unwittingly legitimizing him, it is warranted. Now, again, I'm going to say it again. I would prefer him to fillet Kim Jong-un on a daily basis than to have him attacking him on Twitter and threatening to bomb him via Twitter. But at the same time, it's just, you have to notice that Trump is either hot or cold. He can't find no middle ground like reasonable people would. He either has to love Kim Jong-un or hate Kim Jong-un. And that is extremely weird. It's why I think his behavior is childish. Now, getting to the portion of the interview on climate change, let's look at what he previously said about climate change on numerous occasions. So in 2012, he argued that the concept of global warming was created by and for the Chinese. In 2014, he questioned if we're still spending money on the, quote, global warming hoax, in all caps. And there are numerous examples of him denying the reality of climate change. But in this next clip, he's going to walk back his previous comments.
I think something's happening, something's changing, and it'll change back again. I don't think it's a hoax. I think there's probably a difference, but I don't know that it's man-made. I will say this. I don't want to give trillions and trillions of dollars. I don't want to lose millions and millions of jobs.
So the takeaway, in my view, from that clip was that even when he's being the most reasonable, his position is still unreasonable, because he's kind of moving the goalpost here. And even if we can prove, which we have proven this, that climate change is anthropogenic and humans are in fact catalyzing climate change, well, he's not sure that he would want to take action if it means that there would be negative economic consequences. So even if he seems like he's being a little bit more reasonable here, his position is still unreasonable, because there was an IPCC report, it was a meta-analysis released last week that said we have 12 years to act to avoid a climate catastrophe. If we don't act within 12 years, then we won't be able to keep the overall global increase to under 2 degrees Celsius, which would be a catastrophe. So that's completely unacceptable. He's still not doing what he needs to do. And he also withdrew from the Paris Climate Accord. So even if he is kind of coming around to the idea that climate change isn't a hoax, he's still 100% wrong here. So overall, I just showed you some clips from the interview. It's a little bit longer, but those are the portions that stood out to me. But by and large, Donald Trump is becoming stupider as the presidency goes on. I said before about my theory that, generally speaking, when you look at a president when they're elected and pictures, when you look at a picture of a president on Inauguration Day and you look at a picture, you juxtapose that with a picture of him, at the end of his presidency, you really see how much they've aged because the presidency has taken a toll on them. With Donald Trump, he hasn't necessarily aged, but he is growing stupider by the day.
Support this podcast by becoming a patron at patreon.com/Humanist Report.